Are you facing daunting change, challenges, or complexity in your life? Well, over the past year, I've experienced the same, navigating uncertainty and redefining what resilience means to me. That experience inspired the Contrarian Mindset, a new series launching January 2025 on It's an Inside Job. What does it mean to be contrarian? It means thinking differently from the usual way. It's about questioning common reactions, mindsets, habits, and beliefs, especially those that hold us back. Instead of following automatic fears or patterns, a contrarian looks for practical new ways to build strength, face challenges, and grow. In this series, I'll share the mental and emotional skills that have truly worked for me. Skills that have had a real impact on how I approach life's complexities. These tools will help you break free from unhelpful patterns, confront fears like rejection and uncertainty, and develop the clarity and confidence to lead yourself with purpose. So join me in January to start the new year with a fresh perspective. Well, welcome to It's an Inside Job BiteSize Fridays, your weekly dose of resilience, optimism, and well-being to get you ready for the weekend. Now, each week, I'll bring you insightful tips and uplifting stories to help you navigate life's challenges and embrace a more positive mindset. And so with that said, let's slip into the stream. This week, we'll be taking insights from Season 5, Episode 11, where I had an in-depth conversation with Professor Joel Lee. Now, he's a renowned expert in negotiation and mediation. Now, Joel's a professor at the National University of Singapore and a graduate of Victoria University of Wellington and Harvard Law School. Now, in this episode, we'll explore 3 key benefits. The first is how to normalize conflict. You're going to discover how the conflict is a natural and essential part of life, part of professional life, and we can reframe it as an opportunity for growth. The second benefit, well, that's the art of respectful disagreement. Now, Joel shares practical strategies on how we can disagree without being disagreeable, transforming conflict into productive conversations. And lastly, well, that's about shifting your mindset. We're going to learn how to move away from a win-lose mentality and embrace a nuanced approach that fosters understanding and collaboration. So if you're a leader, if you're a colleague, if you are a client, if you are a customer, conflict is part of the ecosystem. It's part of the professional landscape. And the better we are at it, well, the more resilient our conversations are, the more resilient our mindsets. And we can focus on leadership, communication, collaboration, cooperation. And sometimes it just takes a little practice. So let's now slip into the stream for this week's BiteSize Friday.
I mean, a lot of the times people kind of don't like the idea of conflict. They don't like the idea that there's a little bit of a friction, and so the avoiders of the world or the accommodators of the world, in terms of their approach to conflict, might be saying, well, conflict's a bad thing. Let's not engage, right? And sometimes that's sensible, right? If someone's got a knife to you, I think you should run. I mean, I think that makes sense, right? If there's a tiger coming at you looking really hungry and you look like lunch, I think you should run. I think that makes sense. But by and large, I think most people don't realize that actually conflict's not a bad word. Conflict is a very natural part of life. It doesn't feel good all of the time, of course. It feels bad. But actually, if you think about how, for example, a tree grows, right? It essentially cells multiply in opposition to one another and pushes it up. Similarly, how we move as a result of the conflict of our muscles. There is an antagonism to our muscle. That's why we can move. If they were not antagonistic in a sense, we wouldn't be able to do stuff, right? So conflict occurs, and you just put 2 people together, and they will not be exactly the same. Even twins, if you accept that they might be genetically as close as 2 human beings could be, will have conflicts because they are still fundamentally 2 different people and think differently and have different views. So I think one of the first things we need to say is how do we normalize conflict? How do we say, hey, it's okay that you're fighting, it's nothing wrong, that you have different opinions, right? And then that leads to the second point, which you've also made, is that I think we've forgotten, or we don't know, we've not learned how to disagree in an agreeable fashion. So sometimes I express this to my negotiation students or conflict resolution students. You can disagree without being disagreeable, right? I can say no to you in a very respectful sort of way, or I can say no to you as if you're a real ass. I mean, there are a number of ways to do it, right? And so as you well know, when we teach communication studies, we will usually say how you say something is at least as important as what you say, right? So right, so your choice of words, your nonverbals, your body language, and all that, adds to the total sum of the communication. So I think we've forgotten how to disagree without being disagreeable, right? And part of that comes from a space of needing protection. So I said a little bit earlier that people avoid conflict, and actually this is tied very much into what you will know as the fight response. Right, the flight response that's theoretically part of the amygdala, the reptilian brain, a survival mechanism, right? But a lot of the time, when we have to deal with conflict and we think we have to disagree, we think it has to be in fight mode. And so in order for me to be right, you somehow must be wrong. And of course, that's false, right? That's really a false syllogism. And coming from my legal training, that's what we're trained to do, right? We think in a very adversarial win-lose zero-sum fashion, right? So when I'm thinking strictly in a legal sense, what I will say to you is, in order for me to be right, by definition, you must be wrong, and it is my sole mission to destroy your argument. And if I cannot destroy your argument, I will destroy you. Or that's the mindset, right? Whereas what we need to shift into is a thinking that it's really not a dichotomy. It's not either or. It's not zero sum. Both you and I could be right. Both you and I could be wrong, right? And then maybe what we're looking at is sort of shades, nuance, understanding. And understanding doesn't have to mean I agree with you. I can understand you. I respect your right to have that view, and I might still disagree with you. But that doesn't actually mean you're wrong. Now, of course, when we're talking about facts and stuff like that, we might be able to say there is a right and wrong and all of that. But when we're talking about opinions, when we're talking about views of the world, right, value systems, I think it's way too simplistic to think of it in itself either or sense, right? If you'll excuse me segueing into sort of a slightly different spin to this, although Please. It will be relevant. You might be familiar with something called improv. So improvisational theater work, comedy, and so on and so forth, right? So your listeners out there might be familiar with the show Whose Line Is It Anyway, which is one of my favorite shows. A lot of comedians, the late Robin Williams was an improv artist, right? And he was a master of it. Well, I've often said to my students, negotiation and mediation is more like improv than it is a play, right? Than it is a scripted performance, right? So if you actually have a script and I'm going to first say this, and I'm going to first say this, and you're going to say this, and then I'm going to say that, but it doesn't work that way because as they say, shit happens. Right, brown matter hits rotating object, right, and so you can improv, and one of the fundamental principles of improv is yes, and right, and all it means is I just whatever Jason you tell me, whatever your opinion is, I'm going to say yes, which means doesn't mean I agree with that. It just means I hear you. And then I will build on that point. Now, I know that example is very simplistic, and of course it's a lot more complex than that. But it fundamentally captures the idea that instead of pushing back against what you're saying, right? And sometimes that is expressed as yes, but, right? And we've all experienced the but face, right? The but face being, I love you, but. And we all know that we're about to get criticized after the but, right? Okay. And so a lot of the time when we teach people, sometimes couples, I teach couples how to say this. I say, I love you, and then you just add in what you want to say. But if you go but, chances are, you just erased everything that you said before that.
It discounts everything, right? The first half of that, right? It's the what you say after the but that really resonates with someone.
Exactly. So the choice of words becomes very important, because if I said, I disagree with you, Jason, and my point of view is this, okay, the listener doesn't generally get a sense that you're dismissing their argument. You're just simply saying, this is a different view, and I've heard you and I've listened to you, right? So fundamentally, going back to how do you disagree without being disagreeable is we need to learn listening, right? We need to relearn the skill of listening. Most of us listen to fight back or listen to defend. We're not really, truly, deeply listening to what the other person's saying with the real spirit and intent of trying to see where they are coming from. Right. And again, I understand it, because it's tremendously a big challenge to your identity, right? If somehow they are right and they make sense, does that actually mean you're wrong? Right. So you've got to have fairly good ego strength. You've got to fairly be able to say, it's okay. I can get that you're right, and I could be right too. Right. So role reversal is helpful. There is I often say to my students and people I train, I say, listen, it doesn't make sense to you, whatever they're doing or saying, but it makes sense to them. Don't assume that they're crazy, stupid, psychotic, or whatever. It makes sense to them. You just don't, you're not sitting in their life, right? You're not sitting in their skin and in their shoes. So you don't actually know how it makes sense to them. So there's something called Miller's Law. I think it's named after George Miller. He was a psychologist in the 50s. And Miller's Law essentially says, assume it is true of that for them. What you need to figure out is, what is it, or what could it be true of, right? And it's a lovely way of actually getting someone to sort of role reverse. Now, I know I've spoken quite at length now, so let me catch my breath and let you sort of say a few things.
I think what you've said, Joel, is so well articulated. For me, it comes back down, as you said at the top of this conversation, you talked about conflict and how most of us have a negative connotation of that definition. We see it as a fight, but a negative connotation as towards a fight. And for me, the fundamental narrative for most people is conflict is bad, and that if I'm right, they are wrong. And it's like zero sum. I need to win this. And I think that's what most conflict comes down to. And so what I hear is that fundamentally, before you begin all the listening, before we begin the techniques and the skills, is to go back to the narrative, to redefine the narrative, to have deep discussions, not just once, but to understand the fundamentals of how we define the story of what conflict is. And for me, it's great if you're a business student or negotiation, mediating, arbitration, what have you, and you go into that discipline and you learn that. But for me, I think these are fundamental communication skills that should be taught at a primary school level. I mean, that's
absolutely.
You think about it's a language in a sense, right? Like, I mean, if you learn French when you're 5 years old, you're fluent. You could learn Arabic, French, and English, and you're flipping back like it's one language. But if we learn conflict resolution, if we learn to, again, from a layman's perspective, to define and look at conflict, as you said, where I can disagree but not be disagreeable, and the multitude of other definitions, then I see this as that allows us to bridge things. We're not filled with self-criticism or self-doubt or self-loathing for ourselves or the other side. What is your take on this?
You're preaching to the choir, Jason. I absolutely agree. We teach young folks how to walk at an early point in life, how to do certain life skills, and that might change. What those life skills are might change from sort of period, generation to generation. Mm-hmm. We used to teach young folks how to write. I'm not sure they write anymore. That they just type, and their thumbs are highly evolved, I think, is what it is now. But I mean, I don't know any young person who doesn't know how to use a mobile phone. I don't know any young person who doesn't actually know how to use a computer, right? They're digital natives, I think, the term that we sometimes refer to them as, right? We teach people how to talk, but we don't teach people. We teach people how to say things. We teach people how to read, but we don't teach them how to choose their words carefully enough to create an effect that you want to have. We don't teach people how to think about dealing with the conflict, right? It's not just a skill; it's a mindset. It's how you think about something, right? If we can inculcate into somebody, well, don't do dangerous stuff, right? Like don't touch fire. You see that bear, don't go there, right? That kind of stuff. I think we can equally teach people, when someone disagrees with you, this is how you deal with it. Now, but the problem is, a lot of the time, we don't consciously think about it. We're not mindful about how we approach these things, right? I'm only mindful about it simply because I teach it, and I'm constantly looking out for how people's mindsets are and the words they use and how they deal with conflict, how they react to it, how they push back or how they collapse. I'm constantly looking at that only because that's my wheelhouse, that's my life.
If you want more, why not go back and listen to the original full conversation with my guest? You will find the link in the episode in the show notes. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. And I'll be back next week with my long-form conversational episodes on Monday and the latest BiteSize episode on Friday. And have yourself a relaxing and rejuvenating weekend.